We would like to invite everyone to please rise and join us in singing of the Philippine National Anthem, which will be immediately followed by our prayer.
Sa simula, sa langit ng bagang, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kisag ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningin, ang bituin at araw ng kailan pa may magdidinig. Lupa na ang ating pagsinta, kulay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya
of the Battle of Ising, featuring a commemorative talk as a part of the Kagitingan, the Davao Historical Webinar Series 2021. I am Nico Oreiro.
And I am Felicia Lois Lanya. We are your hosts for today. Before anything else, allow me to acknowledge the presence of the following. Our guest of honor for today, Secretary Carlo Alexei V. Nograles, Department of National Defense Secretary Delphine N. Lorenzana, Department of Tourism Assistant Secretary for Tourism Development Planning, Roberto P. Alabado III, PIVAO Administrator Yusek Ernesto G. Carolina, PIVAO Deputy Administrator Raul V. Caballes, NHTP Chairman Dr. Rene R. Escalante, NHTP OIC Executive Director Ms. Carminda R. Arevalo, National Youth Commission Chairperson and Chief Executive Officer Undersecretary Leon G. Flores III, Davao del Norte's Governor Honorable Edwin I. Jubahid, Mayor of Carmen, Davao del Norte Honorable Virginia J. Tarantos, Girl Scouts of the Philippines President Dr. Salud Bagalco,
Dr. Marvin J. Baguio, PG Department Head, PLGU Davao del Norte, VFP Vice Chairman Romeo D. Alamillo, VFP Region 11 President Daniel A. Quizona, PVB Vice President Mr. Mike Villarreal, Mount Samat FTES Administrator Mr. Francis Initorio, Philippine Veterans Legion National Commander Captain Marlon D. Dantes, Philippine Expeditionary Force to Korea President Major Maximo Young, Hero Foundation Incorporated Executive Director for Operations General Daniel R. Casabar Jr., PVAO Field Service Extension Office Region 11, Dr. Neil Marshall Santillan from the University of the Philippines, Dr. Jose Romel B. Hernandez from De La Salle University, Dr. Archie B. Resos from the University of Santo Tomas, and Professor Marlon F. Agoy-Agoy, MC from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Right now, we have about 82 participants here in Zoom. For those who were unable to pre-register, we are currently being broadcasted via Facebook Live on the official Facebook page of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office.
Before we officially begin the program, here are some reminders for all of us. In case there are lags, just stay on and wait for it to load again. Zoom attendees are on mute to avoid background noise. If you have questions, you may use the message box for our Zoom attendees or use the comment section on the Facebook live stream. After the webinar, the participants who registered in this webinar are encouraged to answer the evaluation form. The link will be sent to your email. Now, for those who have missed the sixth episode of our Kagitingan historical webinar series, which was held on April 22, here is a short recap of the discussion. One of the country's well-known scholar in the field of history and Silliman University's very own, Dr. Earl Jude Paul L. Quiope, provided us the history of Negros Island during the Second World War in the Philippines, as seen through the lenses of Japanese accounts.
With the success of the virtual commemorations of preceding liberations in the Philippines, we have adapted to the new normal setup in perpetuating the heroic deeds of the great efforts of our beloved veterans to ingrain their contributions into the mind of our country's future defenders. For today's episode, join us in commemorating the 76th anniversary of the Battle of Ising, as we have prepared for you our special messages from our guests and an audio-video presentation of this historical event. Moreover, as a part of the Kagitingan, the PVAO Historical Webinar Series, a commemorative talk will be delivered by Ms. Marie Silva Vallejo, author of the book entitled The Battle of Ising, The Untold Story of the 130th Infantry Regiment in the Liberation of Mindanao and the Philippines, 1942 to 1945.
So without further ado, let us begin our program with an opening message from the Department of Tourism's Assistant Secretary for Tourism Development Planning, Roberto P. Alabado III.
Yes, good morning to everyone. Okay, this is Robbie Alabado, and right now, as you can see, my background would be Intramuros, but Intramuros is actually a site of a battle, the Battle of Manila during World War II. For the Department of Tourism, we would like to welcome everyone who's here. We have representatives from the national government, led by CAPSEC, Carlo Nograles, and at the same time, our very own PVAO Administrator, Yusek Ernesto Carolina. We have our local government unit heads, or LCEs, Governor Edwin Wahib, and at the same time, we have Carmen, Mayor of Virginia Perandas. And we have our veterans, of course, and our academe. For the Department of Tourism, why me? Why am I here? This is about a battle. But I would like to tell you that I was a former regional director of the Department of Tourism in Davao. And the Battle of Ising was one of my main campaigns when I was there, because I love history, I love culture, and I want our people, our youth, to know the valiant efforts of Filipinos in defending our freedom and upholding our nationhood. Let me just digress a few minutes. Maybe 15 years ago, I was in the US. I was sent there by Rotary Club to gather more knowledge and skills on my background, which is urban planning. And I was hosted by an old couple. They were in their 80s. And when I was there, I asked them, have you ever been to the Philippines? And the old man suddenly said, yes, I was in the Philippines once. Then I asked him, when was that? World War II. He was part of the return of the American forces here in the Philippines. And I asked him, do you have any war stories? He said, oh, well, we were in Leyte. Then after that, we proceeded to Manila. Unfortunately, his vessel, he was a Navy man, and I think he was part of a mine laying operation, struck a mine. So his participation in the liberation of the Philippines ended that day. So he was sent back to US after that. But the next day, when I met with his Rotary Club, I introduced my host as here is one of the heroes of the Philippines. He helped our guerrillas in liberating the Philippines. And here in front of you, as a Filipino, I would like to thank him for his help in liberating the Philippines. And it was there that suddenly his fellow Rotarians looked around and saw him, and he was crying. Because for the first time, someone said thank you. And I think this sentiment is shared by many of our veterans. How many of our youth have already thanked these people, those who lay their lives for our freedom as we know it today? How many of them have said thank you to our veterans? So this is one of the objectives of these lectures is remembering and commemorating the gallantry of our soldiers, our guerrillas, our people who fought against invaders. So if we have Battle of Ising, I know that maybe some of you would say, what is Battle of Ising? Well, later, Marie will be providing us with information, but this for me is one of the battles where when I met Marie maybe 5 years ago, we were talking about a battle in Mindanao, or a major battle in Mindanao, where it was a face-off between Filipinos and Japanese. No one else. Filipinos versus Japanese. Major battle. And this story has to be told. When my father and grandfather were alive, they were talking about World War II. But it was about being refugees, or being living in the hinterlands of Coronadal City. But that was it. But when we now talk of battle, when we talk about war, we have people, young people, both male and female, going to the front lines and facing death. So parang mga ano to eh, these are people who have decided that it's freedom or death. Those are just the choices that they want. So for the Department of Tourism, I would like to tell you that we are now embarking into cultural tourism. And we are looking at the heritage of the Filipino people as the basis of why people or tourists should come to the Philippines. And one of the best places that Americans would often say that they found here in the Philippines is Corregidor. This is we were once colonized by the US, and the vestiges of their colony of the Philippines are still there, and Corregidor is one of them. But we just changed the story. We changed story as Filipinos. This was where Filipinos and Americans fought the Japanese. And I would always say that the Battle of Bataan showed the bravery of the Filipinos. I have heard stories from veterans saying yung mga kasamahan nila, they died on their boots there. Kasi we were able to prove to the world na pag Pilipino nandyan, walang atrasan. So we died on our boots. And this has been repeated not just in World War II, but also in the Korean War. Walang atrasan ang Pilipino. So this is what the Department of Tourism would like to share to the whole world. When we fight for our freedom, it is with blood, sweat, and tears. So for these series of events that we're doing, maybe the offshoot of these, Battle of Ising, we already have a memorial there in Carmen. But the story of the Battle of Ising is not being told that much. Perhaps tourism can enter the scene and support Carmen, the municipality of Carmen, and the province of Davao del Norte, on how can we package this this battle so that people, tourists, will learn of the valiant efforts, the bravery of the Mindanao people in defending their freedom. So this is what we're going to do. We have stories to tell. We have stories to share. And lecture series are part of it. And I would like to engage our academe for more research. We have the tourism sector needs your research. We need your stories. We need your outputs so that these can be transformed into useful stories that can entertain, educate, and at the same time make patriots out of our tourists. We know that patriotism is alive, but this can be strengthened when we look back to the past, seeing the patriots that we've had for centuries. So, eto pong mga pinaglalaban natin ngayon is just part of what our ancestors have been fighting for. This is the essence of this lecture series. So I hope that everyone will join me in listening to the very interesting Battle of Ising. For those of you who would like to see some of the displays or the museum pieces that Miss Marie has collected, I think they're in Davao, in Davao City and in Carmen. You would be amazed by the photos that she has collected, articles, all of those that are connected with the Battle of Ising. She has collected and assembled them into one story. And this is a very impressive work. Miss Marie, one of the photos that really struck me in the display, there was this picture of I think when they liberated the Panabo penal colony. There was a photo of guerrillas, hardcore guerrillas, and in the middle there was a woman with a rifle, and she was alone. I really don't know who she is. I don't know what her story is. But one thing's for sure, she fought against the Japanese. These are the stories we're looking for. These are the stories that will drive people to further research, to further strengthen their patriotism, to further strengthen their being Filipinos. So this morning, let's hear the story of the Battle of Ising. Welcome everyone, and I hope that we will learn the past so that we will have the ammunition, the bullets for the future. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, sir, for officially welcoming us into today's event.
To highlight the selfless sacrifices and contributions of our World War II veterans during the Battle of Ising, we have prepared for you an audio-video presentation of this very historical event. Together, let us all witness the events that transpired during the Battle of Ising. Let us all watch. Ladies and gentlemen, you have just watched the story of the Battle of Ising. May this enable us to reflect to the Kagitingan's ideals embodied by our veterans and to apply these ideals today in standing unitedly against the threat of the pandemic for our beloved nation to hail as one.
Indeed.
Mayor's office, with its administrator, Yusek Ernesto Carolina, in taking this initiative of holding a virtual commemoration of the 76th anniversary of the Battle of Ising amidst this COVID-19 pandemic that we have been facing up to the present. The common cliche, "the show must go on," is very apt in our activity today. Despite the insurmountable issues that we face every day, we are still able to gather this day to commemorate the good deeds of our forefathers through the new normal virtual platform. It is a bittersweet memory that sings with bravery and courage. The history wrote that the Battle of Ising narrates the ordeal of the Filipinos who fought the war that initiated the freedom in Mindanao from May 3 to May 10, 1945, in their fearless will to prevent the Japanese forces. Today, as we come together virtually to express our profound gratitude and commemorate the bravery of those who honored our country in the highest form of service and fought the war that drove away the Japanese army that was then stationed in Barangay Ising, Municipality of Carmen, We honor their courage in fighting for our country and the bravery and heroism that they have shown at the battlefield. This celebration is a tribute to the Battle of Ising unsung heroes who left their families, their lives, and the safety of their homes to answer the call of duty. Let us all be reminded that the sniff of freedom we have today is the result of the selfless sacrifices by those brave men who valued independence over surrender. The local government unit of Carmen is committed in ensuring that the sacrifices and the legacy that our battle heroes have left behind will never be forgotten. As the municipal mayor of the municipality of Carmen, it is with great pride and honor to be a part of this celebration. We salute the sacrifices of those who fought in the battle and remember them through our veterans memorial shrine put up by the local government of Carmen as the center of the bloodiest and fiercest fight of our Filipino veterans against the Japanese Imperial Army. And this will serve as a reminder for all of us the heroic and patriotic deeds of our veterans. Although most of us have never been to war and have never been wounded or scarred during a battle, we are all modern heroes in our own ways as we walk towards tomorrow, honoring our gallant veterans by paying it forward with the thought of acknowledging the sacrifices of the people who are willing to lay down their lives for strangers like us. I encourage everyone to appreciate the heroic deeds of the Filipino veterans, and just like them, let us become a part of a stronger Mindanao, a stronger Philippines, in our big or little ways of promoting general welfare, and most importantly, to never cease in striving to be the best version of our own self. Our debt to these heroes can never be repaid, but our gratitude and respect must last forever. Let us always respect the lessons of history. Thank you and more power to the children, grandchildren, and the great-great-grandchildren of our Filipino veterans. May God bless all those who serve unconditionally, and God bless us all.
Sahib, Governor of Davao del Norte, for his message.
As a native of Davao del Norte, I feel so proud that our histories have been unfolded, told, and passed on to different generations through the use of different platforms such as word of mouth, news and feature articles in quad media, discussions in public forums, and the most popular one is social media, which reaches out the young generation. I am grateful that the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office has organized the virtual commemoration of the 76th anniversary of the Battle of Ising. Napakalaking bagay po ito, lalong-lalo na sa mga pamilya, kaibigan at mahal sa buhay ng mga veterano ng ikalawang digmaang pangdaigdig. Ang kanilang alaala na lagi nating ginugunita, ang pagpapanumbalik ng sigla ng ating pusong nag-aalab na gagawin ang lahat para pagsilbihan ang mga mamamayan. Ang lalawigan ng Davao del Norte at ang ating inang bayang sinisinta ang Republika ng Pilipinas. According to our historians, the Battle of Ising is the most decisive battles against the Japanese forces in the country, which took place 76 years ago. The valiant bid of the men and women of the 130th Infantry Regiment of the 107th Division of the United States Forces in the Philippines from May 3rd to the 10th of 1945 prevented the Japanese forces from occupying northern Davao, which eventually hastened the liberation of Mindanao from the Japanese. Isa itong yaman ng ating kasaysayan, ng ating may pagmamalaki na tayo ay mga anak ng mga bayaning buong puso at tapang na ipinaglaban ang ating kasarinlan. Nararapat lamang na tayo, lalong-lalo na ang mga mamamayan ng Davao del Norte, ay magbigay pugay sa kabayanihang ipinakita ng ating mga veterano sa madugong digmaan laban sa mga mananakop. Doon sa Ising, sa bayan ng Carmen, at muli po nating gunitain ang isang mahalagang kabanata ng ating kasaysayan na may malaking impluwensya sa tagumpay ng ating tinamasa at sa kaunlarang ating nararating sa kasalukuyan. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pakikisa. Let us celebrate our victory once again as one Davnor, one team.
Thank you very much, Governor Jabay.
Next up, may we now have the President of the Veterans Federation of the Philippines, Region 11, President Daniel A. Zona, for his message.
Good day to everyone. Battle of Ising, Carmen, Davao del Norte is a very remarkable history, not only in the Philippines, but in the entire world. Thousands of young Filipino males joined forces with our allied nation to fight against the Japanese Imperial Army. Ising was one of the bloodiest battles fought in the island of Mindanao. Today, we are also facing the battle of COVID-19. But amidst of the pandemic, we still get and manage to commemorate this unforgettable of the events. What time is hard to forget, as I experienced it during my younger days. But it is happening today because of the pandemic. Also, it's like a war of yesterday. War against the invisible enemy that cannot be seen by our two naked eyes. But to those who experience it, they were hit physically. Why did I say? I say. During wartime, seniors and minor citizens were refrained from outside activities, even looking for food, water, and other essential commodities, afraid of being caught by the enemies. As we go along with our 76-year celebration of the Battle of Ising, I am so thankful that I was able to deliver my short message of what has war before and war today. To the people listening, let's not forget all the sacrifices that has beset us today and the whole world. To the young Filipinos who shed their tears and blood for our freedom and democracy, and love of country, I thank you all. To the young, to the young generations, you are hereby invited to continue remembering the commemorative events of the year and are so lucky, you are so lucky to enjoy the fruits of our sacrifices during the war. Again, thank you so much. Keep safe. Kudos and bravo. To God be the glory.
Zona.
As we recognize the heroism and bravery of the three battalions of over 1,500 men under the 130th Infantry that took over enemy defense perimeter, let us dig deeper into the past and listen to the history that brought us the freedom we are experiencing today. As a part of the Kagitingan, the PIVAO Historical Webinar Series 2021, Ms. Marie Silva Vallejo will be joining us today and will share to us the story of the Battle of Ising. Marie Vallejo's father was a veteran of World War II. After discovering that her father was sent on a secret mission on board a submarine to Mindanao, she wrote the book, The Battle of Ising. As the Americans were liberating Davao, he led the 130th Infantry Regiment into battle to remove a Japanese garrison at the junction of Ising, now Carmen, on the National Highway and prevent them from occupying northern Davao. With the sponsorship of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, she led a team to digitize the guerrilla. On the PIVAO website, unknown events and names of guerrillas, their military units, commanding officers, and those they fought with are now made available to all and reveal many unknown details of the war in the Philippines. The revelation has enhanced the knowledge of our Philippine World War II history. After a career with Intel Corporation in the US, she now conducts historical research and is currently writing about the Filipino-American soldiers in the war. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Marie Silva Vallejo.
Morning. My name is Marie Vallejo. Thank you to the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office for inviting me to speak on the Battle of Ising. My talk will focus on Mindanao, the guerrillas who fought there, and the contribution of the Battle of Ising to the liberation of the Philippines. As a background to the war, this was the path of Japan's Asia for Asians strategy. Japan's goal was to free Asian countries from their colonial masters and be a colonial masters themselves, equal with the United States and Great Britain. To keep their control of the countries they had invaded, they needed an army and the raw materials the countries had. The United States had frozen Japanese assets and established an oil embargo after the invasion of Indochina. Japan knew of the strategic location of the Philippines as the front door to the Southeast Asia, with its rich resources of iron ore and oil that they badly needed to continue their expansion. After invading Thailand in 1940, it looks like the Philippines was next. Pearl Harbor was attacked December 8, 1941. After Pearl Harbor was attacked, the Japanese next attacked 2 US planes and the destroyer seaplane tender, the William B. Preston, in the Davao Gulf in Mindanao. The seaplanes were searching the sea around the Philippines for signs of Japanese ships or an invasion force. The seaplanes were destroyed, but the Preston escaped. This was the first land battle of the war between Japan and the United States. If news had reached Manila on time, the planes on Clark Field that were bombed later at noon might have been saved. Now, why did Japan choose Davao as the first place to attack on the ground? One reason could be that Mindanao had the largest Japanese settlement outside of Japan at 20,000 people, and they may have wanted to protect them. The Imperial Japanese Army was concerned that Mindanao had an American naval base in the harbor and was only 500 miles from Palau Island, which was their major Japanese military center in the Western Pacific. Another possibility was that after Wainwright surrendered Corregidor, the Japanese may have intercepted MacArthur's radio orders, his radio orders of May 9, 1942, to General Sharp of the Visayan Mindanao Force. MacArthur had ordered General Sharp to begin guerrilla operations. In turn, Sharp ordered his men to commence guerrilla operations and release them from the Visayan Mindanao Force. The following day, Sharp, though, was informed by MacArthur. Sharp informed MacArthur that he was surrendering his men after receiving a message from Wainwright that there would be further bloodshed if not all American forces in the Philippines surrendered. But by then, many of the soldiers in Mindanao had already disappeared into the interiors of the jungles. The U.S. Army concluded that the number of men who disappeared into the hills of Mindanao probably exceeded those of all the major islands combined. The Allied forces agreed on their mission en route towards Japan, except for a detour that was important to MacArthur, who was in a hurry to get back to the Philippines. A decision had to be made. Should the Allies go straight to Formosa and bypass the Philippines? Usually, the most convincing or forceful would win a discussion. And MacArthur won in this meeting in Honolulu in July of 1944. At that conference, MacArthur was able to obtain an agreement not to bypass the Philippines in favor of Formosa. Admiral Nimitz, who was the fleet admiral of the US Navy, favored going straight to Formosa, which was closer to Japan. MacArthur argued that the Philippines was US territory, and it was an obligation to liberate the people who had been so loyal to America, especially the guerrillas. His headquarters had been in constant contact with the guerrillas for the last year and a half. He continued that the enemy would not hesitate to seek revenge on the helpless Filipino people, the American internees and prisoners of war. If Formosa was taken first, the US Army would be weakened with attacks by the Japanese Army from behind. In the original plans, Mindanao was the first landing in November, followed by Leyte in December. In August, the Americans began bombing Mindanao. It was the first large-scale air operations by the Allies against the Philippines, with an estimated 400 carrier planes dropping bombs for a devastating 10 hours on Davao, Sarangani, Cagayan, and Digos. Other parts of the Visayas were also bombed. There were no counterattacks from the Japanese on the ground. This reply prompted the Allies to conclude that Japanese defense was weak and change the landing to Leyte and 1 month earlier to October 20, 1944. The Sarangani landing was changed to December. Can you just imagine the effects on the 6th and 8th armies of the United States? And the first landing was changed to an earlier date. That affected over 250,000 men, hundreds of ships of the 7th and 3rd Fleet, but it was done. After Luzon, Luzon was next on January 9, 1945. That was after Leyte. Manila was retaken and the Visayan Islands were landed. The US War Department wanted to move directly to the invasion of Japan. All Allied forces were to focus on the preparation of the Japan invasion. Mindanao was to be bypassed. They believed that the well-organized guerrillas could take care of the enemy. They believed that the 43,000 strong and well-organized guerrillas can destroy the enemy. This map shows the enemy concentration in the Davao City area at that time. They were afraid to leave the city because the guerrillas ruled the jungles, the coastal towns, and surrounding areas. The Japanese even called the guerrillas of Mindanao bandits. Mindanao was bypassed for Leyte, and it was to be bypassed again. But MacArthur forged ahead. He ordered the 8th Army to retake Mindanao. It was the last island to be liberated. MacArthur had a long relationship with Mindanao. Mindanao had been his eyes and ears on the Japanese activities for the last 2 years to help plan his return. He sent a total of 25 submarine landings to Mindanao during the war that brought supplies, medicines, weapons, and radio sets. And then from Mindanao, the supplies were distributed to the other islands, like Panay, Negros, Cebu, Mindoro, Leyte, and Samar. She was the closest to the submarine bases in Australia. The radio were the most important items sent to the Philippines. Trained Filipino radio operators from Australia arrived to operate the radios to support the guerrillas. Reports on Japanese strengths, activities, prisoners of war, and the civilian population were sent back to MacArthur's headquarters to plan the return, locate, and destroy enemy locations. Force Radio Station was the main radio and transmitter on Mindanao. It was established and was so powerful that it also transmitted messages from guerrilla networks in the Visayas and Luzon that could not reach Australia. At the height of the war, Force Radio Station had to be off the air while it moved several times deeper into the jungles of the Agusan River to avoid avenging Japanese patrols. General MacArthur demanded in a very clear message that it was not to go down at all, period. His army needed the reports to plan for the return and locate enemy positions for destruction. These were the defenders of Mindanao. They joined together against a common enemy. The first two groups, you had Wendell Fortig. He commanded the 10th Military District of all the guerrillas of Mindanao. He divided Mindanao into 6 areas, each garrisoned by a division commander that reported to him. Members were composed of USAFE, enlisted men, and civilians. The other groups were, you had the Lumads. They provided carriers of the cargo. They were message runners, trail guides, and whatever food they could spare to the guerrillas. The Mandayas, with their exceptional strength, they navigated difficult terrains while carrying cargo from the submarine landings. The Ayetas were expert rattan gatherers. They wove 1,000 small rattan hammocks to haul gravel and soil to help build an airstrip for planes that brought supplies to the guerrillas. The Magahats and Tausugs were especially a fierce people and sometimes feared by the other Lumads. Then there were the guerrillas. Then there were the civilians who suffered the most. They risked their lives by spying for the guerrillas. They provided food and whatever they could spare in exchange for protection against the Japanese. They also carried messages to radio stations and cargo from the submarines to the guerrilla camps. Then there was the area of Mintal called Davao. It was the home to the largest Japanese community outside of Japan at that time. When the Japanese landed on Mindanao, many were arrested and placed in concentration camps. Their loyalty was questioned. I wonder how much they knew of Japan's plans to invade the Philippines. This map shows Mindanao divided into divisions commanded by a guerrilla leader and thousands of men under them. Many battles were fought by each division in their area against the Japanese to protect their radio networks, civilians, and their camps. April 1945, the Americans landed at Parang Cotabato. When they landed, there was hardly any opposition, thanks to the guerrillas who had earlier cleared the area. The American task force went down the Mindanao River to picket across and Cabacan to the east. A combat team then, they split and marched north up the Saire Highway, and a second combat team marched southeast along Route 1 towards Digos, then up north towards Davao. That surprised the Japanese, who thought the Americans would land in the Davao Gulf. They had prepared heavy defenses and mined the harbor of the city. The Davao area was important, and it was protected by the 107th Division under Colonel Claro Laureta. His objective was to protect the force radio station, the main radio station that was connected with Australia, and it was located in the jungles of Agusan. Claro Laureta was a former Davao PC officer who did not surrender. He took 30 of his men to Kapalo, where around several thousand civilians were living. He was able to amass several thousand guerrillas into a well-organized division, ambushing Japanese patrols. One significant contribution of Laureta's troops was their help in the escape of the 10 prisoners of war from the Davao Penal Colony. The escapees were able to board a submarine to Australia and reported to Mcarthur the brutal treatment of the prisoners of war. It was the first time that the world knew of the Bataan Death March and the prisoner camp conditions. Now, the 130th Infantry Regiment was the combat unit of the 107th Division. The regiment was composed of unsurrendered soldiers, formerly PC officers, farmers, and men who wanted to strike back. A year earlier, Lieutenant Saturnino Silva, with 4 Filipino radio operators from Australia, arrived in a submarine to provide radio and reconnaissance support to the guerrilla headquarters of Colonel Wendell Fortig. When the force radio station network moved several times into the jungles of Agusan, Silva was assigned as detachment officer to protect the road to the station, which Mcarthur had ordered not to go off the air for any reason. When news arrived of the Leyte landing, Silva was transferred to the 107th Division under Laureta to be his chief of staff. He set up a school to train the men in heavy weapons such as mortar, bazooka, and anti-aircraft weapons that came in with the submarines. Using the heavy weapons allowed frontal attacks on the Japanese, and for a longer period of time, no more of the hit and run with only a rifle. In the months before the Americans entered Davao City, Silva was busy promoting, demoting, disciplining, and moving men between battalions and companies from different locations in the Davao area. He was building the strength of the regiment. While the Americans were fighting in Davao City, the 1,500 men of the 130th Infantry Regiment attacked the Japanese garrison entrenched at the junction by the Ising River along the highway. Veterans of the battle that were found and interviewed described the Japanese having cement bunkers, machine guns, and snipers tied to the top of lawaan trees. The 130th Infantry Regiment was on the north side of the Ising River. The Japanese garrison was on the south side across the river. The mission was to defend the perimeters of the 3 rivers of Tagum, Tuganay, and Ising. The Japanese garrison at the Ising River Junction by the National Highway was to be removed. That would prevent the enemy from escaping to the northern areas of Mindanao that were free of Japanese presence. They were successful in overrunning the enemy and clearing the National Highway. After the clearing of Davao City, the Americans marched north and met the guerrillas to continue hunting down the enemy soldiers who survived the battle and had scattered into the mountains. Here are some thoughts of the men during the battle. I'll give you a few seconds to read their thoughts. On the right side is a photo of Peregrino Andres. I was so glad to meet him when he told me that he was Silva's adjutant and was beside him in the battle. He also said that the plan of attack was created by Silva and led the attack now that the Americans were in Davao. Several days into the battle, Silva was hit by a sniper's bullet in the leg while inspecting the Ising Bridge to see if his men could cross it. Many of his men were drowned by snipers as they swam across the river. His adjutant, Peregrino Andres, was also hit in the foot. Although Silva may have wanted to finish the fight, I am glad that he was only wounded and carried out of the battle, or I might not be here. Silva is my father. I wanted to show you this map that shows the many decisive battles of the guerrillas in Mindanao. Ising was just one of them. Today, there is a monument at the junction of Ising, now called Carmen, commemorating the guerrillas of Mindanao who fought during the war. Beside it on the right is a smaller marker commemorating the Battle of Ising. If you'd like to learn more about stories, names, events, deeds of bravery that can be found online on Mindanao and the other islands, log on to the PIVA website. I always want to make everybody aware of this. This is the upper part of the website on the Philippine Guerilla Recognition files. 280,000 records of the complete files were scanned, cleaned up, and placed online. You can access this anytime. If they are small, you can enlarge them so that they would be clearer to read. The records from the U.S. National Archives are stories, affidavits, photos, any documents that the guerrillas submitted that showed proof of his being a guerrilla with his unit. If the papers were verified by his commander, the other guerrillas he was with, and interviews with the civilians in his unit's area, then he was entitled to receive death and other benefits. Many units were approved and many were not. Before I end my talk, I wrote the book on the Battle of Ising from the records in the U.S. archives and libraries. Included are the stories of the battle from the veterans gathered by a volunteer group led by Armando Medina, who first championed the history of the battle in Carmen. Thank you for allowing me to share with you the Battle of Ising.
I believe Ms. Marie Silva Vallejo would like to add further information. Good day, ma'am. May you please unmute?
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video and hope you learn more about Mindanao that way. I have, let's see. Okay, I have two more slides that I would like to add to this. So I'd like to share my screen before answering any questions that you may have. Okay, share screen. Share screen. Does everybody see this? The map of Mindanao? Okay.
Not yet, ma'am.
Yes, you do? Okay, all right. I just wanted to add on to this that, wait, let's see. Okay, the submarines landed in these three areas in Mindanao with the submarines whenever they brought supplies and men from Australia who were radio operators and reconnaissance men who were trained in infantry and jungle fighting. It was in Butuan. You have your Butuan Bay. That's the most landings there. Then Pagadian Bay, and also Tawi-Tawi. They also had a big presence in Tawi-Tawi. So I wanted to show this to everyone. Then the second slide I wanted to add on to is this. submarine missions to the Philippines, all of the Philippines, was from February 43. There were 4 before that, but these were the ones that were actually under, that had radio operators and brought more supplies and radios. It was from February 43 to January 1945. Total number of missions to the Philippines, total was 41. The number of submarines, there were 19 of them. But if you could see, this were, the narwhal is the most, 9 missions, and they were mostly from the Philippines, to Mindanao. The narwhal was to Mindanao, most of her missions. The next was the Nautilus. So from this, I wanted to show you that that's how the guerrillas from all over the Philippines was able to receive ammunition, supplies, some medicines. Of course, they were never enough, but they were coming from Mindanao because it was the closest to Australia. And from Mindanao, it was distributed overland or by sea, and it took months to get to Cebu, Panay, and even all the way up, Samar, Mindoro, all the way up to Luzon. Okay, so these are the 2 I wanted to share. Now I could answer questions now if there are any questions. Stop sharing.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now send in your questions. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Yes. We are now opening the floor for the questions from the audience and the public. For our FB viewers, please place your questions on the comment section, and for the Zoom participants, please place your questions on our chat box.
Yes, I believe we have our first question already, ma'am. One of our viewers asked, why was Davao called the Little Tokyo of the Philippines? Can we conclude that prior to the World War II, friendship existed between Filipinos and the Japanese?
Friendship between the Filipinos and the Japanese? Is that what you're asking?
Yes, ma'am. Can we conclude that prior to World War II, there was friendship existing between these 2 people?
Well, you would say yes, basically, because they were allowed to stay in Davao. That was the largest Japanese community in Davao. Outside of Japan at that time. But they had their own government, they had their own hospitals, they had their own embassy. So they were in constant contact with Japan. They taught their children, their children had their own schools, and they taught them Japanese and Japanese culture. So they were a very sort of like exclusive group in a way. So I guess they were allowed to stay in Mindanao because I think it was Ota. Ota was a main businessman, a big businessman in Mindanao, and he had the largest sort of like albaca processing enterprise then, and many other enterprises. And he helped a lot of the Japanese to create their own business and fund hospitals and schools. So the Filipinos learned also various how to fish, how to plant certain things. So a lot of these skills they learned from the Japanese. So it was sort of a give and take. And so probably they left the Japanese alone, with their own government and schools. And that area in Mintal, there is a small Japanese museum in Mintal that has some of their equipment that they had left behind after the war, and before a lot of the people migrated to Japan. After the war, Japan had a sort of a government program wherein they allowed the children of Japanese, maybe married to Filipinos or just Japanese, to migrate to Japan.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, next question, ma'am. This is from Jimboy Eugenio, one of our Zoom participants. Kung titingnan ang mapa na pinakita ninyo, ano po ba ang link ng Battle of Ising sa mga gold treasures from Japanese Imperial Army na makikita sa iba't ibang panig sa Mindanao at Visayas?
Gold treasure, may nakita sila?
Yes, so yun po yung pagkakabanggit ng ating Zoom participants, mga gold treasure.
From gold treasures. Okay, I know. Palagi. I always get that kind of a question. The veterans, when we interviewed them, the veterans, they really never spoke about, gold treasures, mga ganyan. Pero in the process of getting to know more about Mindanao, I mean, I never knew about Mindanao before this project. Because I wasn't born, or I'm not from Mindanao, but I learned about Mindanao. Many houses, maraming mga bahay na nalulumpag na, or sort of like leaning towards one side or the other, because many people had been digging up for treasures under those houses. So there's been talks about the treasures, but none really was found of those treasures.
Thank you very much.
We have another question from our Zoom participant, Mr. Obet Pagdanganan. The question is, were the veterans of the Battle of Ising and other areas in Mindanao able to get their benefits and pensions from the United States as promised?
Okay, that's a tricky question. I think it was before, when the United States was trying to gather enough forces in the Philippines. Okay, when Mcarthur was trying to build up the force in the Philippines to defend the Philippines, with the Japanese attack. But Mcarthur had thought that the Japanese would attack the Philippines in April of the next year, the following year, 1942 April. But the Japanese attacked December 1941. So it was too late. There wasn't enough men, to gather enough men to protect and to train, really. And there wasn't enough also equipment that was sent by the United States, because it was Europe first. They were fighting in Europe first. So the president of the United States at that time had said that, okay, those who would be joining us, the Philippine Army at this time, would have the same benefits as the American soldiers. Many joined because of that. Unfortunately, after the war, which is a very sad thing, and I'm also very sad about that, there was the Recession Act of 1946, wherein the soldiers were not given the same benefits. In a very short term, I'm going to just describe this: that the soldiers were not given the same benefits as that of the American soldier. The Guerilla Recognition Program after the war, which is from 1945 to 1948, some of them extended, they were, if they could prove it, and that's the one in the PVAL files, they could prove it that they fought with the Americans and they were a real fighting unit at that time, they could get benefits for education and also for death. Those were the benefits.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Another question from Ms. Tonette Oreja. Why did the main U.S. force defend Davao City while Lieutenant Silva and guerrilla forces defend the periphery?
Could you repeat that again, please?
Sure, ma'am. Why did the main U.S. force defend Davao City while Lieutenant Silva and guerrilla forces defend the periphery?
Defend the periphery. Okay. The American forces, their plan when they came in to liberate Mindanao was, from that presentation of mine. This was from Parang Cotabato, I think. There it is, from Parang Cotabato. I don't know if am I sharing this? Okay, no, that's okay. I can't share shall I share my screen? Let's see. Okay, I'll share it. Just really cute so that it makes it easier. Okay, you see this? Okay, when the Americans came, they came in through Parang. then they took the river, fastest way, to Cabacan, Piquet, Cabacan, and then then they split. I think it was the 41st, so elements of the 41st went up north to liberate Cagayan area, and then you had the 24th straight down to Digos and then up north to Davao. This took only 2 weeks. They were double marching, and so that really surprised the Japanese. Now, it's not. I guess I'm trying to say that the 107th was trying to help the Americans. Actually, all the divisions, all the guerrillas in Mindanao under Fortig was to help the Americans and work with the Americans when they landed on how to liberate Mindanao. So it wasn't because they left the 107th or the 130th Infantry in Carmen, in Ising, and the peripheries to defend them. It wasn't that. It just that they knew that the Americans were coming in, and when the Americans were into Davao, about May 2nd, May 3rd, they were liberating Davao at that time. That was a time, I believe, that the 130th said, we go in also. We go in and remove that garrison from Ising, so that when the 19th Infantry Regiment from Davao goes up north to continue clearing that highway going north to Agusan, that garrison will be out of the way, basically. And they were able to do that. So when the 19th Regimental Combat Troop of the Americans went up after clearing Davao, they went up north, and then they met the guerrillas at Ising. And they continued on to mop, they call it mopping, which is clearing up, going after the stragglers of the Japanese that are scattered into the hills of Kyotoy behind Panabo. To answer your question, Tanet?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay.
From one of our Facebook viewers, Yipun Arni, she said that if the Japanese weren't stopped in Ising, Mindanao would have been infested by the Japs. Hypothetically, ma'am, if the Japanese won in the Battle of Ising, what would be the implications in the outcome of the war?
They would have had, well, then the Japanese have continued on to the northern part of Davao, all the way to Agusan. They would have continued up there. And in Agusan was where it's free of the Japanese, and it would have been harder, I believe, to eliminate the Japanese from that area, because Agusan is swamp, jungles, nothing lives there. They can hide there forever, in a way, and just force the civilians to feed them. So I believe that the liberation of the entire Mindanao would have taken longer.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am.
Next question, ma'am. What happened to Major S. Silva after the war?
What happened to?
Major Silva after the war.
Major Silva, okay. When he was hit, it was about the 4th or 5th day during the battle, and he was checking the bridge over the Ising River, because it had been bombed by the Japanese months earlier. So he was by the bridge, and then he was checking, because that river before was a wider river and deeper. Now it's almost like a canal, really, and it's changed its course. So he was looking at it to be sure how deep it is, because he was ordering men to swim across the river to the Japanese side and try to eliminate the pillboxes on the other side. And a lot of those men were being hit by snipers. Can you imagine swimming across this river and the snipers' bullets are just whizzing all over you? So many died. They really did. Many died, or many just were able to get across. Many returned, not wanting to die. So when he was checking the river and what to do next, probably, then there are two accounts. One said that I saw was that there was a sniper that hit him on his left leg, that shattered his leg, so down he went. A second source I read was that it was a machine gun. It had to be, and I believe it had to be a machine gun because it shattered his left leg, just literally shattered it. So he was immediately airlifted to Leyte Hospital, from what I found, to Leyte Hospital, and then to the US. His left leg was so shattered that he underwent over a dozen operations on it, and he had a metal rod in it, and he walked with a limp for the rest of his life. That leg was like 4 inches shorter for the rest of his life.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, we have another question from Zoom. Mr. Jimbo Eugenio asks, is there any idea po why General MacArthur chose to live in Manolo Fortich, Bukidnon for Australia? Bakit hindi sa Davao na mas secure siya doon?
That Fortig left from Manolo Fortich, which is here. I mean,
yes, ma'am. Manolo Fortich, Bukidnon for Australia.
Okay. And not Davao?
Sa Davao. Bakit
And not Davao? Okay. I believe because he was more familiar with the Manolo Fortich Bukidnon area up here, because that's where his first camp was up there in Bukidnon, Misamis, that area, the Bonifacio area. That was his first camp in early 1943. So he is familiar with that area, and I guess there's less Japanese around that area. That's the only reason I can think of. If he truly, I'm not sure where he left. In research, I saw that he left Mindanao at a certain time, but not exactly where he left from. And if he left from that northern part of Misamis, again, it's because he's familiar with the area. He has friends there. He knew people who could protect him. And he had two of his divisions up there, the 109th, I think, or the 110th Division. You see this? Up here. So he would be up here. This is that area, the Lanao area, where Fortig was familiar, because his first camp was in that area. So he knew the Misamis people. The Misamis sisters were there. These are old families, the guerrillas. So that's what I believe would be his reason.
Okay. Thank you very much again. We would like to welcome back DOT Assistant Secretary Alabado, sir. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Would you like to add anything, sir?
Yes, I'm from Davao, so I just support the observations of Miss Marie. During the pre-war of Davao, there were 20,000 people, Japanese settlers there, and they were actually farmers. But some of the, according to stories, some of them were actually intelligence officers. So they had forward information on parang it has this was a plan years in the making. So ganyan ka.
So they say.
Yes,
so
yes.
Research says that, no?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know. That's why I had placed there that they were not sure of their allegiance. You see.
Yes,
they were
yes.
not sure of their allegiance at that time, but they left them alone because they were contributors to the Mindanao economy.
Yes,
a lot of them. They learned from the Japanese also.
And they were contributing a very valuable resource. That's the abaca ropes. So
Exactly.
the Navy would be needing the ropes, and they have to have the farm. So the resources of these Japanese settlers in Davao was also very important for them. So I think the Japanese Imperial Army was also taking care of them. Although the allegiance, there are stories that the Japanese actually settlers were actually helping some guerrillas because they were their friends during peacetime. So those were the stories that are around in Davao.
Okay. All right.
Yes. Thank you very much for that additional information, sir. Thank you, Ma'am Marie. And this one is a comment from one of our FB viewers. Miss Lilian Gudani Akitanya said, another reason po for General MacArthur to stay in Manolo Fortich, Bukidnon is that it may be near the Butuan Bay where the submarine lands. Okay, next question.
Okay.
Well, yes, but if It didn't have to be with the submarine when he left for Tig, because he was being flown in to Leyte. The planes were coming in at that time because the Americans were already around. So I believe more that he didn't leave through submarine. He left through planes from Leyte, sent in by the 8th Army.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, we have another question from one of our Facebook viewers, Eufemio Agbayani III. We heard in other wars or defections, were there Japanese defectors who joined the guerrilla allies, considering the personal relationship of Davao Japanese and the Filipinos? So this works the other way around. Were there any people who left the Japanese army to join the Filipino side?
If they were married to Filipinas, I would think so. There would be a tendency, but nothing really that stood out. But I am sure that that happened.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Okay, another one from our FB viewers. This is from Mr. Mark Gabriel Solis. Ma'am, what is the highlight for you? What is the highlight of the Battle of Ising? And in your opinion, what can we learn from it?
The highlight was that I found out about my father, which I never knew. You know, a lot of even the veterans that we found and interviewed, they didn't want to talk about the war, not just Ising, but the war. But when Armando Medina and his group convinced them that this is your time to tell your story and your participation and your valuable contribution to this war, they opened up a bit more. But of course, the men are in their 80s, and you know, sometimes the mind is not that good anymore. But they were able to get little snippets, little parts here and there that they could piece together on what they saw and experienced during the Ising battle. So to me, it was a revelation. How it came about was because I was sent a brochure of Carmen, from Mindanao. And when I received that brochure, I said, what do I know about Mindanao? I don't know Mindanao. I'm Visayan. I was born in Iloilo. So I said, what do I know about Mindanao? What do I care? Blah, 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 so on. So anyway, I opened it. And in that brochure was Andres and Sirpo, who's in the Andres here. Andres, I don't know if I'm sharing with you, but Andres in my screen sharing. Okay, Andres here on the right. I was able to meet him, and to me that was really more than enough. I practically cried, and he looked at me and he said, "You're the daughter?" And then I said, "Tell me more." So aside from Andres, we met up with Armando, and he told us about the Battle of Ising. And I said, I don't know anything about this. And that started me on my journey. That took me about 2 years, 3 years, 2 or 3 years, and into the archives of the United States and the libraries of the United States, because there's hardly anything on them here. See, Mindanao was the last to be liberated. And even the US Army historian, Robert Ross Smith, in his book on the history of the US Army in the Philippines part, he apologizes that he didn't have enough of Mindanao. Mindanao was the last to be liberated, 1945. Let's see. So that was the highlight for me.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. We have another question from Mr. Ray G. Carolina. What was the relationship like between Japanese invaders and the Japanese immigrants in Davao during the war?
There were various researches on that I read. One was in Davao, there was after that the seaplane Preston was attacked. Okay, that was December 8th, right there, right after Pearl Harbor. It was attacked. It was the first land invasion. It's the Philippines, and it was Mindanao. When they talk about, in the newspapers, they say, Apari, and then they would mention Mindanao at times. Sometimes they mention Davao, but when this was found, that the very first one was that Preston, that was the first land battle or attack of the Philippines and in Mindanao. So actually, that's what bothers me, is because if that if that news reached the Philippines by noon, before noontime, those planes on Clark Field could have been saved. But it didn't happen. So the planes were just demolished on Clark Field by noontime. They were caught off guard. They were having lunch and so on. Anyway, going back, what was the question? I have so much information that sometimes I'm jumping around. When actually December, I think 2 weeks later, the big Japanese ship landed in Davao Gulf. Then the Japanese men disembarked, went on land. There were reports of Japanese civilians or residents who were welcoming them with tea and something to eat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So that was one research that I found. Then also, when the war broke out, a lot of the Japanese were concentrated or placed in sort of like a internment area by the forces of Sharp, who was the American commander in the Davao area. So you have these two reports on them. Some of them were interned and arrested, Japanese civilians, and there were Japanese civilians that welcomed 2 weeks later, the Japanese soldiers that actually landed in Davao.
Okay, ma'am. Next, this is from one of our FB viewers, Mr. or Miss Yipun Arnie. Hello, madam. As I was searching about this battle, I stumbled upon a comment that claims it's from your book po. It says the Americans regarded the Mindanao guerrilla movement as the best organized among the resistance groups in the Philippines. Now, what is their edge from the ones in other places?
Okay, it was Mindanao, and then the other one is always this competition with the Northern Luzon, Volkman. Colonel Volkman's group or organization, also very well organized, but I think he had less guerrillas than Fortig did in Mindanao, but they were both organized. They just thought that Mindanao was more organized because of their past experiences when the submarines were coming in and distributing all of the supplies, the medicines, and so on to other islands. The trust was there, for them to do that. So that's why I said that the Americans believed that the organization in Mindanao was much more organized, or the most organized from all of the groups, organized guerrilla groups of the other islands. They had, research shows. You can't say everything. It will take books and books of it. But it was research and reports from behind, radio messages of the Americans in their conversation with the guerrillas in the various islands, Panay, Negros, Mindoro, and so on. The guerrillas, a lot of them were fighting. They were fighting each other for turf, for land, for men, for food, for civilian support. And that was one problem that the Americans had when they were trying to prepare for their return, because where to send the submarines, where to send the supplies to, because there was no one guerrilla leader that one had to be recognized in the islands for them to trust and send those supplies to, and not be used just by their men. So I believe that it was the trust of the distribution and the organization of Mindanao that made them say that from the very beginning, from 1943. Also, if you look at the reports and the reports that was sent in by Mindanao, it's also, you can see it also on the PIVA website. The guerrillas of Mindanao were so organized that they documented almost their daily activities. The guerrillas in camps, by division, who was killed, who was wounded, what battle. So that's where I would believe that, yeah, they were most organized.
Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Actually, we have one question for the Department of Tourism, Mr. Roberto Alabado, if you're still here. We have a question directed for you.
Yes.
Is the Ising Monument part of the World War II pilgrimage for foreign tourists?
Okay, so from the Department of Tourism, as I have said earlier, we are still enhancing the product parang offerings of the Philippines for tourism. The well-developed ones in terms of World War II are here in Luzon. We have, of course, you have the Corregidor, we have the Bataan Death March, we have the Bataan war monuments all over. You could see it all over Manila. You could see it in Central Luzon. However, correct me if I'm wrong, Yusa Carolina. Almost all of our national war memorials recognized in the national level are actually here in Luzon. Wala po sa Mindanao. So we are campaigning that this Battle of Ising, the monument itself, will be part of the national memorial in the Philippines. So once that this becomes a part of the national memorials, war memorials, then we can really push this in the international level. For now, I have when I was the Department of Tourism Regional Director in Davao, I would hear ang pumupunta sa Davao commemorating World War II are actually Japanese. I have heard of some tours, silent lang. They would go to Davao, and there are small groups who would go to certain places and just pray. Maybe they know where their warriors or those who were killed in World War II were probably buried. So merong ganon na tourism. World War II creates an interest to go to the Philippines, both from the Americans and the Japanese. So ang sagot po, hindi pa natin napapackage to for international tours. But we're hoping that once we develop this product further, then why not? Let's package it. And perhaps we can get the interest of Americans, of the Japanese, to see this, to learn the story behind the Battle of Ising.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, it will be a worthy endeavor. We will be looking forward to that. Okay, another question po directed to Miss Marie. This is from Lilian Gudani Akitanya from one of our FB viewers. I can recall from the stories of my mother about Davao City, then prior to the war, the Japanese were friendly. Ma'am, do you think that this was a strategy to spy on the situation or scanning the environment before the invasion?
Possibly. Possibly. The Japanese in Davao, they were 20,000 strong at that time. But in Baguio, before that, you had Cannon Road. That was also by Japanese, that was brought in by the Philippine government as laborers. So when that was done, Quezon opened up Mindanao and said, okay, would anybody who would like to go to Mindanao, open to everyone, Japanese, whoever, to sort of like it was the front, what do you call it, wild frontier at that time. He said, because he wanted Mindanao developed. So a lot of the Japanese went to Mindanao also. And then intermarried with some of the Lumads, the Bagobos, and so on, to maybe probably to own land, to open up a business or to be more closer to the locals over there.
Okay, thank you.
The question.
Okay, I believe we have one last question from Zoom. This is Jimbo Eugenio. Ma'am Marie, may idea po ba kayo as to the road network in Mindanao just before the onset of the Japanese war in Mindanao? The road network po, ma'am.
The road network?
Yes, ma'am. The road network in Mindanao.
I don't understand. I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. The road network. What you mean, the plan or what, the path of the military?
In connection with the strategy of the Japanese, however they want to strategize the invasion po, ma'am.
The Japanese, how the Japanese wanted to strategize the invasion of Mindanao?
Yes.
Is that the question?
Yes, ma'am. We believe so, ma'am. Tama po. Mga daanan po ng sasakyan strategy just before the onset of Japanese war in Mindanao.
There were not very many. A lot of them were trails in Mindanao. And if there was one or two, if like main, and they're very also coarse that they can, they can scratch you, and it's so dense you can't see in front of you. But that was pretty much the okay, here you see this map. Am I sharing? Yeah, I'm screen sharing. Okay, you see the map here. So if you there was that is seeing it was a national highway from Davao. Okay, this Davao here, hold on. Here, this is better, I think. This is better. You have from here, this is Davao. It goes up to Carmen. You see right here. This was sort of like one of the national highways from here to here. When I say national highway, it's more of like a wider trail, because all of this, there were just trails here. And that's why they depended a lot on the Lumads and the Bagobos. On the Lumads, not only the Japanese, but also the Americans, when they arrived, they depended on them to guide them around, because they knew the fields and the areas. I think I missed this part, and I just thought of it now. The Moros, they were very active also. All of these datus are mentioned who fought the Japanese, all of these datus. So I just, from research, just pulled them all out as they were mentioned and just added them. Pendatun later on became Secretary of Defense. Datu Piang was very famous because he really had a treaty with the Americans before the war.
Miss Marie, can I add?
Go ahead.
Yeah. If you could recall what Miss Marie was saying, from Parang they had to go to Kabakan, and Kabakan they used there's a marsh there. It's called Ligwasan Marsh, and it is that is like the highway that's being used by almost all. Even my grandfather was using it to go around Cotabato. So that was what she mentioned, that they used boats to transport the troops going to Kabakan. So
yes,
that's
Parang,
one way.
From
Parang
the
to Kabakan.
took the river. They took the river
to
Kabakan. That's why it took them only 2 weeks to get to Digos.
Yes.
They took the river. And that was because of the Lumads telling them and the guerrillas telling them.
Then there's also when they went up from Digos going up, so Davao going up, there was actually, it was like what was said, it was trails. That's mountains between Cagayan de Oro and Digos. So part of those mountains, the trails that were built by the Americans going up to Cagayan de Oro, they also had to pave it. And that is now what we call the Buddha Road. That trail that they made.
They paved it after the war. Okay, I don't think they did any paving during the war. Actually, there were ravines that they had to put, what do you call it, travel, carry over ravines on wires, their supplies and jeeps and horses and everything, whatever.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that was developed into a highway later because that
Yes.
was the quickest way.
After the war.
Yes, yes. Mm.
Before anything else, before it all ends, I just want to reiterate again my appreciation to PVAO, the USEC Carolina, and the NHCP, Chairman Escalante, for sponsoring this, because it is nice when we share a lot of this, to share a lot of our history, and especially also of Mindanao, which I realized that was very important. To me, more important than the other islands. Now you can blame me on that comment right there. But at the very beginning, right after the war, the first radio communication with Australia was NACAR. Okay, September. But Bataan Corridor fell April, May. By September, October, NACAR from Northern Luzon was able to communicate with Australia. And after that, soon after that, he was captured and executed. Then who comes up next? Who's able to communicate? And they really try their best. Panay was next. And then soon after that was Mindanao with Fortings. This all scrambled to look for a radio, and they kept trying and trying and trying. So as early as February 1943, Mindanao was already the first contact. The first submarine mission to the Philippines, not knowing it was a suicidal mission of Filipinos. Okay, they didn't know any guerrillas. It was supposed to be Mindanao, but because the landing was compromised, presence of Japanese, it was diverted to Negros. That's why the first landing of the submarine was in Negros. It would have been Mindanao, but that's okay because the second one came was Mindanao, and it kept on going. That's what I'm trying to write about.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. Okay, so I want to go back. Before I forget, I keep getting diverted. I wanted just to thank PVAO and NHCP. Okay. And I just wanted to mention again Armando Medina, who started this whole thing. Armando Medina of Carmen. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. And it's nice to be getting the insights from you, ma'am, and of course, our DOT Assistant Secretary. Sorry, ma'am, we still have one more question here. Are there any film, documentary, or perhaps local? I'm so sorry. Hold on for a second. I think I lost the question. Okay. Again, are there any film, documentary, or perhaps local shows dedicated to popularize the Battle of Ising or educate the people about its history?
There's no video or anything of that sort. I don't think so. It's just been, actually, this just a presentation like this, the book. But I invite people, if you want to know a bit more of Mindanao, and if I could share anything from my research, you can just send me an email and I'll do a quick answer. It has to be a quick answer because I'm currently trying to finish a second book.
Thank you, ma'am. We will be looking forward to your second book. Do we still have any more questions? I think that okay, Miss Pinky Montemayor would like to open her camera. I think she would like to say something. Hold on, ma'am. Miss Silva. Okay. Oh, yeah. We're sorry, I think we're having a technical difficulty right now. Okay, so while we're waiting, ma'am, one last question. Miss Marie, last na lang po. How many veterans are alive today in Davao? Do you have any idea about the number?
No, I don't. PVAO might have the answer. There was like a veterans association in Davao that I was sort of communicating with. And I don't know if their office is still alive or what. I'm not sure. But I sent them some of the books, and then also to Armando, some of the books also. Okay, there was an exhibit. I forgot about this. About 2009, I think, after the book came out, there was an exhibit at a private museum in one of the villages in Davao. It was there for about 3 weeks. There were many. I took many photos and and the exhibit materials was sponsored. It was really nicely done. And that was so nice because a lot of the kids, the children from the schools and so on came, and I had a binder of the list of the names of the men in there, and they had they saw that some of them saw their lolos, so that was just heartwarming. It made them want to know more. So it would be nice if some of those exhibit photos could have been shown here. That would have been really helpful. But after that, there was also the same exhibit material was shown in Panabo after that. And then after that, also at the Davao Museum. Right now, the Davao Museum. So right now it is in storage in the Davao area because the Davao Museum is being renovated. I'm hoping that it would have a permanent place in a museum. I think Tagum has just opened a beautiful museum. And I don't know, if that would be a nice place. Mr. Alabado, calling Mr. Alabado, let's not waste the exhibit materials. I don't know if you were able to see the exhibit.
I was the one who arranged it. Marie, we were in Davao together.
No, but the very first one, the private one.
No.
You weren't, I don't think you were the one. Okay, but
yeah, the one in Davao Museum, yes.
Yes, okay. I don't know whether the Davao Museum has been already erected because when you have exhibit materials as nice as that, they might just rot if they're in storage. So if not, then maybe we should just transfer it to Tagum. I don't know,
Yeah.
Mr. Alabado, let's work on that,
Yes. Whatever museum
for the
who's
people.
willing.
That's really for the people.
Yeah. Whatever museum or whichever museum who's willing to put it on a permanent exhibit, let's go for it.
Okay. I leave it to the DOT to work on that. No, really. Leave it to the DOT to work with Tagum. They have a beautiful. I heard that they have a beautiful museum. So I just leave it there. I let everybody know. Let everybody know it's out there. But who will charge and make it happen? Because that's how you also expand the knowledge of the bravery of the men of the 130th. They died. They really they a lot of them died, wounded, killed.
Okay, apparently we have, ma'am, another or a few more questions, too important to skip. This is for both you and Sir Alabado. From Sir Reggie Sabadal of the Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, FSTO Region Cebu. Is the history of Battle of Ising already incorporated in the Academe of Davao for further increased knowledge and information to the constituents of Davao? So is the Battle of Ising already incorporated in the Academe, ma'am?
I do not know.
I don't have information, but I would assume that based from the interviews that I have on students, they don't know. They don't know about the Battle of Ising. Even our tourism students, when I was a regional director there, it's not being taught in the history. It's just mentioned, but there's no in-depth discussion or knowledge and such. That's why, as what Ms. Marie was saying, we need museums, we need exhibits so that these not the collection that she has amassed. These are very beautiful photos that would really educate people about the Battle of Ising. So if we cannot, as I mentioned in the chat room, it has not really been mainstreamed in the teaching modules, I don't know anything about, I have not heard anything about it.
If there is a representative of the Department of Education here, they might be able to talk to their superiors.
Yes, unfortunately, we do not have a representative from the Department of Education, but indeed, it would be nice to have it incorporated as, the younger gen. Oh, Jim, actually, we have one participant, Mr. Jim Boy Eugenio. I'm at DepEd CDO lang. He's from CDO. So there you go. Ma'am, last question. Marie, how do we see Ising in the context of PH defeat in Bataan? Does it have any connection, ma'am?
How do we see Ising as related to the Bataan, what do you call it, surrender, or the Bataan fight, or
The Bataan defeat, ma'am.
the Bataan defeat?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, okay, the Bataan defeat happened April 42. April 42. Ising happened 1945. So that's 3 years of retaliation, feelings of retaliations of the locals.
Yeah.
With
Okay, ma'am.
regards to the defeat on Bataan. And then now they have been suffering for 3 years in Mindanao under the Japanese rule. So right there, the guerrillas would certainly rise up. And what have I got to lose? That's kind of what I felt when I was reading all of the veterans' interviews.
Thank you very much, ma'am. I think that's all of our questions for today. And we will now end our open forum. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yes, thank you everyone for participating in our Q&A and for sending in your questions. Thank you very much also to our resource speaker as well for responding to our viewers' questions. This
Thank
time,
you.
let us all, okay, yes, ma'am?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. Okay, this time, let us all hear from Secretary Carlo Alexei B. Nograles, our guest of honor for today's event, for his message.
Maayong adlaw sa tanan. Thank you, Philippine Veterans Affairs Office, for inviting me to join you all in commemoration of the Battle of Ising. To our distinguished veterans, my fellow Davaoeños, it is my great honor to be with you all. The Battle of Ising is a story of courage, of ordinary people who refused to surrender to Japanese imperial rule in World War II. A conflict that involved virtually every part of the world during the years 1939 to 1945. Beyond the island of Mindanao, from among Mindanaoans all over the world, the tale of the all-Filipino 130th Infantry is rarely mentioned, and not as much even in Philippine military history. And yet, this story is an embodiment of Filipinos' heroism at its finest. Ordinary Filipinos, farmers, fisherfolk, ordinary men and women who stood up in defiance to a powerful enemy and accomplished the extraordinary feat of liberating Davao from the Japanese. This story of achieving greatness has profound symbolism in the evolution of our nation. It could be presumed that post-World War II, Filipinos were looking for a glorious moment to rally on as they bounced back from the devastation of the war. If there was already social media at that time, the story of the Battle of Ising would have been one trending moment. We know that the people of Carmen, Davao del Norte, having known that from among them were heroes in the flesh, didn't have to look elsewhere to relish that their own had won a great war, and that, in the description of today's generation, would be beyond lit. It's 2021, and this story of the 130th Infantry's victory should be among those always told to as many and as often as possible. We need our history teachers to share more of these glorious moments once upon a time in our history. Our children, our young, most especially, need to know what is meant by valor and courage and greatness from the ordinary. As we continue our battle against this COVID-19 pandemic, with many close to losing hope, we find inspiration in the retelling of the Battle of Ising. The search for meaning and understanding with everything that is happening now, we look to our forebears for courage and the will to fight on and soldier on. Your government is working with you and for you in this war with COVID. We have not stopped working hard to contain the spread of the virus while safely reopening and restarting our economy. We continue to strengthen our public health systems, our testing, contact tracing, and isolation capacities, aligned with our prevention, detection, isolation, treatment, and reintegration strategies. With our national vaccination deployment plan, and most importantly, the full support and continuing cooperation of everyone in their observance of minimum public health standards, and soon enough, we will be able to defeat this enemy. With our concerted and courageous actions, we will win this war soon. As a Mindanaoan and a Davaoenyo, I share in the honor and pride for the heroic deeds of our dear veterans. And we honor the lives that have been given up to fight for our nation's freedom. The story of the Battle of Ising is a reminder for all of us in these bleak times that we face. May this hope born 76 years ago be rekindled to lighten up our spirits and keep us firm in our cause. We are all deeply indebted and indeed grateful for the sacrifices of our veterans. Tawatan ninyo ang among kinasingkasing na pagpasalamat. Daghang salamat kaninyong tanan.
Okay, thank you very much, Secretary Nograles, for that wonderful message. As we now near the end of our program, let us have PIVAO Administrator Undersecretary Ernesto G. Carolina to deliver to us his closing message.
May I greet our Zoom participants, our Facebook viewers, representatives from our partner institutions, and of course, our resource speaker for today. A pleasant afternoon to one and all. In today's webinar episode, we have centered our discussion on the Battle of Ising, which transpired at Carmen, Davao del Norte, one of the most decisive battles against the Japanese forces in the southern part of the Philippines, won by an all-Filipino troops. Sadly, this is hardly mentioned in our history books. In May 1945, the 138th Infantry Regiment, with 3 battalions consisting of over 1,500 men, occupied a defense perimeter across Ising River from an enemy attack by seizing a network of pillboxes, trenches, landmines, mortars, machine guns, sniper watch tower, and an airfield. Under Major Saturnino R. Silva Sr., the 138th Infantry Regiment attacked over 2,000 enemy forces and overran the Japanese first line of defense, thereby halting the Japanese from occupying northern Davao and Agusan. The battle prevented the Japanese from escaping through the Davao-Agusan road and forced them to retreat to the hills, hastening the liberation of Mindanao. The said battle happened when Ising was still part of the territory of then municipality of Tagum. At present, Ising is now part of the municipality of Carmen in Davao del Norte. Unfortunately, locally written books and materials in circulation barely scratch the surface of what really happened during the Battle of Ising. For this reason, I would like to express my gratitude to our speaker, Ms. Marie Silva Vallejo, who has readily shared with us her extensive research work in order to give a more comprehensive retelling of these historical accounts. As a grateful generation, we must make it our compelling duty to preserve and propagate these stories and testimonies of the living survivors and veterans of the war. These records manifest that our Filipino veterans were much more involved in the country's liberation campaigns than what we are often led to believe. I also thank our partner institutions for staying the course with us in pursuing the challenging task of increasing the awareness of Filipinos, especially the younger generation, about the stories of our veterans. After all, the lessons of the past are what connect us, the present generation, to those who fought for our future. We are now halfway through our Kagitingan webinar series. We've learned a lot from our previous episodes, but there are still much more to explore. We hope to see you in the remaining 3 episodes. Once again, thank you, and good afternoon to one and all. Mabuhay ang ating mga veterano, mabuhay ang Pilipinas, mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Ernesto G. Carolina, for your message. Now, before we officially end our program, may we now have a photo op together with our guest and resource speaker. To our dear participants here in Zoom, you may now turn on your cameras as we prepare to take the photos. Again, may we invite our participants to please turn on your cameras and participate in the photo op. Okay, we're taking our first photo. And another, we're taking another photo. Please stay still. And taking another photo, please stay still. Okay, please remain still as we take our photos. So other participants, please turn on your camera. Again, please stay still as we take our photos for the photo op together with our speaker. And there we go.
Thank you very much. And once again, for those who are able to pre-register, we will be sending a link to your email. Kindly accomplish the evaluation form, and you will be receiving your e-certificate after a day. And kindly check your spam folder in case it was sent there instead of your inbox. And for the next episode of our Kagitingan webinar series, we will have Dr. Maria Felisa Sihukotan, who will present the Makapili. This will be held on May 12, 2021 at 2 p.m. We hope that all of you could join us again.
That concludes our virtual celebration of the 76th anniversary of the Battle of Ising and the 7th episode of the Kagitingan, the Davao Historical Webinar Series 2021. May this commemoration serve as an avenue in gratifying the veterans, both written in the Defenders Hall and those whose names are still unknown, for their endurance and resilience in selflessly offering their lives for the love of freedom, whatever may be the cause. We thank everyone for joining us this morning, and we hope to see you soon in the next one. I am Nico Oreiro.
And I am Felicia Lois Lanya. We have been your hosts for today. Once again, mabuhay ang ating mga bayani. Thank you and good morning.